school after being outsmarted by a Morty and for having his Morty view his crybaby backstory, it gets incredibly hard to really care because the show is a constant walking contradiction, and I can only hope that season 6 finally strikes that balance we got to see a glimpse of.
Father, I just wanna tell.
When you get home, Rick, do some classic adventures, like season 1.
I'm so sick of that f***ing note. What the f*** does it even mean?
Someone's clearly upset. Rick and Morty's 6th season has come and gone. It's amazing that we can just say that about a Rick and Morty season now. After the overwhelmingly mixed response that season 5 generated, whether you liked it or not, it was clear the show was going to finally shake up its status quo for the first time since season 3, and that had many people cautiously optimistic. So I'm not terribly sure where to begin with this. Close to a year ago, I released a video detailing the decline of Rick and Morty from its high point in seasons 1 and 2, all the way to its low point in seasons 4 and 5. Season 3 is sort of just the shy but gifted middle child. It has the makings of greatness, but in the end it still ruined the family's happiness. Theoretically, of course, we all know Justin Roiland wouldn't make it that far in a relationship. This video is close to a year old now, and well, people seem to like it. Kind of. The overall thesis I came to of this video was that ever since the end of season 3, the show became incredibly self-conscious and felt like it was afraid to take itself even remotely seriously. Rick and Morty has always been a silly show, it's absurdist comedy at heart, but the first couple of seasons demonstrated its ability to produce genuinely shocking, heartfelt and serious moments of storytelling that felt distinctly sincere, while not sacrificing the dark comedy. It was able to be noticeably silly and darkly comedic without devolving into gross out or humor that relied on the lowest common denominator. That was still there, of course. Rick and Morty is a very dumb show, but it often counteracted that silliness with genuinely smart character writing and witty back and forth between said characters, with the occasional meta joke sprinkled in. That isn't to say the show was a supremely intelligent form of high art put down the fedora. We're talking about Rick and Morty here, because it's never really tried to be, and it's not what anyone realistically expects it to be. The point is that before season 4, Rick and Morty was relatively sincere with what it tried to be and what it wanted to accomplish, which is why I found it incredibly disheartening to see that after the ambitiousness of the 3rd season failed, due to them going too far in the serialized direction and muddying the development and behavior of the characters, seasons 4 and 5 would desperately try to course correct the show to, in their own words, being like season 1 but more streamlined, which is an overtly meta way for them to tell the audience that they want to stay completely episodic and silly. And I was perfectly fine with this approach until it became more obvious that the episodes were getting far sloppier in their execution. The show was still creative, but now it felt like the creativity of the episode concepts was all it had going for it, as the general execution lacked the wit and sincerity of the first 2 seasons. The way the characters would bounce off each other, namely Rick and whatever goofy character they conjured into existence, was far less dependent on wit and dark humor, and instead consisted of a slew of obnoxiously meta jabs and weak observational humor. These had their moments for sure, but the novelty of Roiland's jokes had seemingly worn off by now, as the shtick of taking a joke and constantly milking it until it's no longer funny was losing its impact, especially when many of the jokes consisted of Borderlands level writing observations. And what wasn't helping this approach to saying only episodic was that the show would never truly committed to that. It still tried to tell the story it was originally trying to tell with sincerity, but now did it with an annoying amount of self-awareness, cynicism, and a glaringly obvious amount of spite for its own fanbase. A show that was originally juxtaposing Rick's nihilism of him caring for his family and having his arc reflect that at the end of season 2, has seemingly submerged itself in the concept of nihilism and cynicism entirely, simultaneously treating the show's canon and story as if it doesn't matter while still trying to have its cake and eat it too, with moments that are trying to have an emotional impact or hold some sort of weight. I've seen some people who, apologies for the bluntness, rather idiotically claim that Rick and Morty has never taken anything seriously before, so we shouldn't complain about it. I would like to say, f that. The ending of season 2 as a whole contradicts such an argument, and so does Morty's trauma upon world hopping for the first time in season 1, or Morty consoling Summer of his newfound perspective when she finds out she was an accident, or Morty finding out that Rick is chronically depressed and in pain, Rick literally trying to kill himself upon driving another person he cares about away due to bad habits. You know, I can go on about that. This is why it's frustrating for long-time viewers to watch seasons 4 and 5 and notice that half of the dialogue is dedicated to making fun of serialization and the fans for wanting the show to care a bit more. And on that topic, for Justin to care a bit more, as I think after years and years of going ooh-wee and Fallout 76 live streams, his Rick voice is starting to give in.
One-way blind hop beacon protocol. Here we go!
I guess it's now a fact that the average white person can do a better Rick and Morty voice than the actual Rick and Morty. Pass me a cup. No one wants Rick and Morty to be solely story focused. They tried that before and got overwhelmed with season 3. But this constant annoying self-awareness as a replacement for the show's humor just so the writers can vent about hating serialized drama and making fun of anyone who used to genuinely care about Rick and Morty on a level that isn't the intelligent masterpiece for Redditors show was starting to get tiring. Which is why with the finale for season 5, despite it being hard to care about the show acknowledging its plot again, admittedly opened up up a world of new stories they can tell, and from the looks of things, the show wanted to go back to the actual Season 1 that they described in Season 3's ending, having a balance of episodic while acknowledging the development of the characters and the plots. Well, a guy can dream, can't I? Season 6 is a marked improvement over Season 5 on the basis that it doesn't have as many disaster episodes, but in terms of overall quality, I think this might be the most meh Rick and Morty has ever been. It's not a bad season, but being painfully mid is not what I'd call an accomplishment. As per usual, the animation and visuals look fantastic, and some of the scenery caused me to pause for a moment just to soak in the details and the lighting. We're a long way from how rough Season 1 looked, but that's a given. The soundtrack is something I never pay much attention to of Rick and Morty, as it usually consists of small orchestral pieces that blend into the action, but some episodes, specifically Night Family, go unnecessarily hard on the OST, and it really adds to the atmosphere. But with those things out of the way, we're left with the 10 episodes to analyze. I'll try and keep my critiques of the show chronological, building up episode by episode so things don't get too confusing, but god, if this ain't the most mixed I've ever been when reviewing Rick and Morty, so expect me to deviate at some point. Some fun and decent episodes, some painfully average ones, and a handful that seriously suck. Following up on Season 5's finale, where evil Morty broke free, destroyed portal travel, and left our Rick and Morty to die on the remains of the Citadel, the season opens with some great ideas, and even executes some of them pretty well, but it's held back by lingering writing problems that have jumped from Season 5. The good stuff to mention would be Rick's character actually being taken seriously for the first time in like a season, which was also the first time he was taken seriously since like Pickle Rick, I think. We get to see more of him acknowledging his own problems and being caught in a lifelong cycle of searching for Rick Prime, a new antagonist who we saw kill his original Beth and his wife Diane. The sequence in his home dimension with the ghostly judgmental voice of Diane haunting him was both surprisingly funny and equally tragic, especially when he acknowledges that he doesn't want to move on. Morty being brought back to his original dimension and conversing with Jerry was interesting, if a little undercooked, and Rick trying to hide how he cares for Morty when going after Rick Prime fully convinced me that they were going to start taking the development of these characters seriously again. Unfortunately, we don't get a whole episode to focus on either of these two plots, because there's also a C-plot involving the two Beths and Summer that feels like a complete afterthought. So the segments involving each of these characters goes far faster than needed, and it's only Rick's plot that gets time to breathe. Something the show needs to stop doing is finding a way to include the other Smiths in any episode regardless of relevance. It's entirely possible for their subplots to be funny and even effective, but at their worst they actively detract from how enjoyable and cohesive an episode is. And what sucks the most about this is that they give both of the Beths their own episode this season with very little in the way of it regarding subplots. So they're completely capable of doing this, they just don't want to do it when the episode centers on Rick and Morty for some reason. I also didn't get the best first impression with this season because the second it begins we're treated to a slap together Avengers Endgame reference.
How it ends. I thought I was better than this. Dramatic voiceover while stranded in space. I guess when you're dying, the first thing to go is your creativity.
Oh yeah. One more thing!
Followed up by more shoehorned reference jokes and observational humor. Not only does this completely destroy the tone created by Season 5's ending, but it requires me to go into every episode with a Reddit checklist for what kind of joke they're about to make. Many of them are so simple when it comes to references that I feel any 12-year-old with a YouTube account could write them.
His plan was to monologue and f*** off. He basically threw a tantrum to announce he was quitting Twitter. Nobody quits Twitter.
Christ, easy there, just a robot. Comedy is largely subjective, but there's a clear drop-off from how sharp the show used to be and how different the delivery of these jokes are. There's just a lack of confidence or any real bite in the delivery, which doesn't help the already unfunny joke. This doesn't just apply for solo Ricks, it applies for every episode, barring a few exceptions where they aren't sniffing their own farts for a change. Recently, creator of Rick and Morty and respecter of women Justin Roiland released a game called High on Life, and apart from the game being the textbook definition of it also perfectly displays how absolutely insufferable Justin Roiland's style of comedy can get when it's at its worst.
Oh boy, a big sideways elevator, original. You know, they had one of these in Akira. And I think Evangelion, you ever see those? Anime exists in space, you know. Did I tell you that already about anime? Space people love anime. We love all anime. It's considered taboo not to like anime in space. We even like that show Code Lyoko. You know that Cartoon Network show from like 20 years ago that kind of looked like anime except everyone had huge foreheads for some reason? Yeah, we liked it. You know what else had an elevator like like this, I think Final Fantasy VII. Definitely, I think Chrono Trigger, Resident Evil 2. You remember those games? You probably don't know them. We only have
Shut
them
the
in
fuck
space.
up,
They're
Justin!
crazy.
High on Life's sense of humor is the exact same as Rick and Morty, but far less restrained, which makes it about 100 times worse. While Roiland has demonstrated time and time again, even in Rick and Morty, that he's capable of being really funny, a lot of the novelty has worn off since 2013, which results in him trying too hard. It just comes across as a jumble of spitballed references that hold barely any relevance beyond, hey, you recognize that, right? Haha, laugh, as well as throwing an abundance of fourth wall breaking meta junk at the viewer. I'd like to add that fourth wall breaking meta jokes had become tired and overused by Deadpool 2, so the fact that Rick and Morty is still riding on the high of this overused trick that they admittedly helped popularize 10 years ago, instead of aiming higher or trying something new of its style of humor, is very telling. I'm getting really sick and tired of shows seeing meta as a replacement for comedy. While Solar Rick sets up plenty of new and interesting ideas to take the series, as well as course correcting Rick and Morty's character arcs, the existence of some lingering problems made me a lot more cautious, and I can't say that feeling of unease didn't persist as the season went on. Season 6 has a ton of good ideas for episodes, like Rick needing to fish Morty out of Roy by starting a not-religion semi-cult, convincing the independently thinking people in Roy to rally to his cause, resulting in a full-scale war that lasts decades inside of Roy. But then this madcap and entertaining premise is absolutely ruined by the other 60% of the episode focusing on Summer doing a Die Hard, in which I spent the entire time wanting to headbutt a belt sander.
Do a Die Hard. Ever seen Die Hard?
I'm 17. No, I've never seen Die Hard.
Well, neither did the guy in Die Hard, so you're nailing it.
Make sure nobody else here is doing a Die Hard.
Sneak around, crawl in some vents, do a Die Hard. That's Die Hard. Don't have to see it to know that.
Are you doing a Die Hard?
Your associate Frank is definitely not doing a Die Hard.
It's not every day one meets a fellow Die Hard enthusiast, Miss...
Call me Die Hard.
Okay, Die Hard. Tell me, what do you know about Die Hard?
Just because you're aware of how much you're milking a joke does not change how insufferable the episode is. This story is such an afterthought and it has no reason to be here, really. Continuing the trend of the show being insufferably meta instead of just embracing its ridiculous plotlines with sincerity like with the Roy plotline, which barely leaves much of an impression because it's neutered from the start of the episode. But then you have an episode like Night Family that goes with a crazy premise and just runs with it, experimenting with what Rick and Morty usually do in terms of tone with some horror elements and a distinct lack of meta gags, playing off of the characters' interactions with each other instead. And what do you know, it ended up being my favorite episode of the season by a long shot, having some of the best visuals and music dedicated to small gags, which displays a ton of confidence and allows the execution of said gag to work, whereas the overtly meta stuff does not. This episode could have been from season 1 and it would have fit right in, if just a little bit weaker, because it actually gives a shit and rolls with a crazy premise without waterboarding it with self-referential gearbox dialogue or having several attempts at being as shockingly gross as possible. It's a shame that this is where the season peaks, at least for me anyway, because there's only one other episode this season that comes close to this, that being episode 8, Analyze Pits, which again takes an absurd and gross premise but actually does a few interesting things with it because it's not constantly stating how much it hates itself. Cough cough. There's a number of impactful scenes in this and it shows a side of Rick that we barely get to see, along with him taking therapy seriously for a change and being better for it. Even though I'm incredibly mixed on the last quarter of the episode, it's still so obvious that when the writers aren't concerned with being meta funny men and actually write something with heart that they cared about, Rick and Morty can be pretty decent and the characters can feel like real people again. The sentence Rick finds that Pitmaster killed himself and pretends to be him to improve his image sounds like the setup for a joke, but it's played completely straight and it works for Rick as a character. He was tired of reacting and fighting because he hated it, learned to embrace not doing it when he learned to ignore the people that would provoke him, only to realize once again that participating in conflict gives him a sense of purpose. We've seen this happen before, but here we see Rick once again getting involved in conflict but for a much nobler purpose, improving the image of Pitmaster who believed he had died a failure. This is why I'm mixed on season 6, because in the very few instances it gets something right, it really gets it right. But then we have the other episodes of the season that just aren't nearly as good as Night Family or Analyze Pit. Final Desmithation has entertaining action but an absence of real laughs, and King Mortar makes me want to purchase a firearm. And even then, not all of these episodes are episodic, goofy adventures. 2 of them attempt to be somewhat heartfelt or try to write interesting character development, but either it doesn't work because of how stupid and repetitive they are, or because it's just so out of left field. Alright, let's get the non-wife wife-beating sex pest out of the way, Dan Harmon's incest fetish. Rick and Morty is full of it, usually jokes, but season 5 and 6 have so many of them that it starts becoming a pattern. What starts as a one-off gross-out joke has pretty much become mundane, and in some instances this season it's not even a joke. Episode 3, Beffic Twinstinct, is a decent episode on paper, being a slow-paced and full-blown character study of Beth and her learning to love herself and taking back control in her life through the existence of Space Beth, representing the side of her that yearns to accomplish great things and having that side of her reconcile with herself, the side of her that loves her family. So then they f***, and this episode is very controversial for just being uncomfortable. It's one thing to make repeated jokes about it, but to show the development and serious incestuous romance between Beth and herself is just not how I would have personally approached this. I don't know, I'm not the writers, I can't force them to do what I want, but there are so many opportunities to tell better stories with this one concept instead of just being gross. It's gross, they acknowledge it's gross, I understand that. It still feels like they took this option because it was the grossest one they could come up with. A lesbian romance between a main character and one of the most popular TV shows in the world, and it's incest. Pass me a cup. And it's a shame because many of the scenes here stand out for being quiet, more relaxed than the rest of the show, and there was an opportunity here to explore these themes in ways that didn't result in this. An episode with Beth and Space Beth going on a solo adventure and figuring things out about themselves along the way, like showing Beth getting used to and enjoying the freedom, while showing Space Beth's desire for her family. There's just a lot of missed potential here, but at the very least this served a narrative and character development purpose as much as it makes everyone on the planet recoil in disgust. Jerry f***ing his mother doesn't get that excuse. The episode itself is fine, but sheesh Dan, cool it down. And I'm still not really over the missed potential of the Beth stuff. You could have established an arc that sprawled across the whole season as well, but of course they don't do that. It's Rick and Morty, the show that simultaneously loves and hates itself too much to the point where any mere suggestion for how the story could go is treated as if you're forcing the creators to write a certain way, or forcing them to tell stories that they don't want to write. As evidenced by episode 7, Full Meta Jack Rick. Remember the train episode from season 4, the episode that people lauded with frankly undeserved praise because of how meta and self-referential it was, when in reality it was just an excuse for the writers to air their insecurities out and grouping critics of the show in within the show's notoriously toxic fandom. This is a sequel to that, and it's even worse in pretty much every regard. There's no issue of making fun of the toxic fans of the show that try to get their way, but this is such a blatantly insecure and petty response to criticism of the show, it's downright embarrassing. There's a very big difference between being clever and being obfuscated. Throwing in an absolute barrage of meta jokes and writing terms and fourth wall breaks to the point where it becomes nigh incomprehensible is not a substitute for clever writing. Rick and Morty's fourth wall shattering lost its novelty around season 4, and like a magician with only one card trick, there's only so many times you can overplay the same song and dance you helped popularize in 2013 before general audiences start getting tired. The core takeaway from this episode is that the show just wants to be chaotic and fun and can do whatever it wants, which would be fine if 1, the show would stick to that, 2, if the show was always like that, and 3, if this didn't blatantly contradict the very f***ing foundation of how the show's episodes are structured. You know, hero's journey, there's the circle thing, the thing that Mr. Harmon teaches at lectures. And can we please stop this nonsense about continuity being dumb and making fun of people for caring about it? Yeah, people care about the characters of this world and previously set up events. I wonder whose fault that could possibly be.
Is this whole place just a bunch of groan-inducing wordplay for 7 TV critics that won't even enjoy it?
Oh, someone touched a nerve. It's good to know that we're at a point where wealthy, talented white people are so butthurt over what some fucking YouTuber says over the internet that they don't listen to the good faith criticism as opposed to the bad faith ones, but just lumps them all together, loads them into the back of a truck, and then backs them into a river as one. You can't even be shocked, it's just funny that people working on one of the most popular TV shows of all time are this afraid of people online talking about how the show isn't consistent anymore. If you're gonna have continuity, don't spit on people for caring. In terms of other episodes, it really does feel like the show is running out of gas. Even conceptually, these episodes are boring compared to what it's done before. Intelligent dinosaurs return to Earth, an entire civilization living on Pluto. No, the sun. I meant the sun. Is this a civilization on the sun? They've never done that before. God, even the ending is just a half-hearted shrug as they write themselves into a corner over an unfunny penis gag, and then they just redo the Vat of Acid episode apparently. Like, a number of godly beings waging war over something that Morty screwed up can be, like, legitimately interesting, and then they just take the most boring options while real laughs are incredibly scarce. It feels weightless. pointless. The execution lacks so much conviction they write their way out of an impossible situation by going, "Hey, run," as their episode climax. And as for the dinosaur episode, seeing Rick go out of his way to clown on someone or a group of people will always be naturally entertaining, but the conflict feels so superficial and weightless and predictable. The only unpredictable part of the episode is where the writers decide to troll literally everyone, including Rick, by having the dinos seal the rift created by evil Morty, with Rick himself going on a long droning rant about how they just ruined so many potential adventures, and it's here where I pretty much gave up hope. Having to break the fourth wall this many times just to stick it to people who care about the show's potential and continuity is getting old. It's getting tiresome. If the show doesn't want to follow a plot point people expected to follow up on, then don't make your substitute episodes boring and predictable in comparison to the goldmine of potential stories that you literally just sealed away out of spite. The impact of Season 5's ending is gone, because not only is portal travel back, but the rift is gone too. But it will be followed up eventually in a way that's far more convoluted and wacky and dismissive and cynical compared to how gratifying it would have been for the show to just follow a basic fundamental of storytelling for once and allow themselves to experiment more. The final episode is where I just stopped caring, really. Keith David is always an absolute riot as the president, and that's not the issue. It's an okay and relatively entertaining episode, but having them reveal that the only reason Rick was being nice throughout episode 9, and finally felt like he was being a bit more tame, which felt like a natural progression after episode 8 showed him doing something positive for another person's image as well as not wanting to hurt Jerry's feelings. The only reason he was super nice in episode 9 is because he was a robot the entire time, and they waste no time in immediately following it up with a Westworld reference joke. Whenever it feels like they're ready to take a step forward with the characters, they smack them back down to ground level for the sake of shocking the audience. But it's not shocking anymore, it's expected. Rick may still be trying his best to be better, but let's be real. He's had the same arc since he was locked up in Season 2. Season 3's opening is a fantastic episode from top to bottom until you realize just how much of Rick's development was forsaken for the twist. Whenever he's shown to care, it's a goddamn twist waiting to happen. As optimistic as I am, they'll probably cut that out in Season 7. Well, if Season 7 happens anyway, you can pay me to care at this point. Season 6 was the show's opportunity to finally go somewhere with its characters and story after willingly setting up so many possibilities and promising that this time it's for realsies, this time we'll take the story seriously. Then they showed us that it was kind of possible, and then it just kept derailing. And then it brought back the cruddy reference jokes and over-reliance on meta-commentary, and slowly but surely, all the sincerity we saw in the first episode is just gone. I think it's safe to say that Rick and Morty Season 6 is certainly a season of television. It was written, it was voice acted, it was animated, it exists. There's some fun episodes here, 3 of them are on the verge of genuine greatness, and the rest either exist or just suck. The show has run into a problem where they hyperfixate on a small idea that can't carry itself for an entire episode, thus making the plots thinner, the actual jokes more dated, and everything else feels like it was either an afterthought or something that they really wanted to be the actual focal point. I think the best way to describe this season is by putting things into perspective. The first episode sets up the Rick Prime plotline and how Rick wants to catch him, and the final episode sets up the Rick Prime plotline and how Rick wants to catch him. Nothing has moved forward, so why should we stay invested in a story you clearly want people to be invested in if you aren't going to care? I'm not a cynical or jaded asshole or anything, I just desperately want the show to stop sniffing itself and give me a reason to care again. Because it's clear that they want you to. This isn't anyone reading too deep into it, like Rick and Morty is not deep. It is a very, very surface level show at the moment. But apparently, caring is just too hard for them at this point. It always has to be meta, self-referential, unexpected in the worst possible ways. Rick and Morty isn't a TV show anymore. It's a constant tease that strings people along with breadcrumbs, burns them, insults the people that followed them, and then lays out more breadcrumbs so they can fulfill their absolutely miserable quota of 70 ordered episodes. I just can't keep watching a show that does that. Rick and Morty has become tiresome. And honestly, about goddamn time.